Today for our agenda, talking about measuring every click, staying compliant, how we can really get performance and ROI out of our marketing campaigns and efforts while still doing it very safely and with member privacy in mind. So we're going to have a quick kind of refresher on why compliance still matters. It's been a very up and down and messy last few years in the healthcare space for healthcare marketers. Talk a little bit about the compliance blueprint and why it is the foundation for everything we do. And then we're really going to dig into what marketers really want to do, which is get out there with their great campaigns, their message, their brand, measure and track ROI, prove all the way down to the financials, and really make sure that we're getting the most performance out of the dollars that we're spending. So to kick off, my name is Saul Fofana. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Penrod. We've been helping healthcare solve these industry challenges for the past 15 years now in technology. I personally spend a lot of my time specifically with healthcare marketers, and over the last few years, those conversations have really been dominated by data and compliance and HIPAA and everything but actually marketing. So today we're going to quickly review kind of that current compliance landscape as I talk about how fundamental it is, but then also how we can leverage really leverage it as a foundation for growth and really dig into growth. And to do that, I've got my partner Jim Slavo on the call here who can introduce himself.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Saul. Hey, I'm really excited about our conversation today. And again, many thanks to those of you who have joined. We aim to make sure that it's well worth your time. For those of you who did not know me or have not yet partnered with me, you're going to learn really quickly that I am absolutely obsessed with data and ensuring that we're making data-driven decisions. And really my mantra is really every marketing effort needs to really start and stop with data. My name is Jim Slavo, and I've been a marketer for nearly 30 years now, and I've spent the last 12 years focused solely in healthcare, right? It really aim to deliver better experiences for members, brokers, and patients, and supporting cast as well. I've been really blessed to support some of the largest healthcare organizations in the country, including where I was on payroll leading digital enterprise CRM transformation at Franciscan Health. I was responsible there for really leading marketing growth, retention, and marketing ROI across our health plans, our patients, service lines, referral management, and several other pieces there. The last 6 years, though, I've been spent serving our payer and our provider industry as a consultant with really one goal: empowering healthcare marketers to drive growth, to drive retention, and really measure everything to move marketing from being viewed as a customer over to being viewed as a revenue generating department. So Saul, I appreciate our call today, man. I'm looking forward to this.
Cool. So I think in the current landscape, the point to drive home here is that when it comes to advertising, measuring, optimizing, communicating, the compliance layer is really the foundation. And hopefully today we illustrate that if you nail this part, if you make the right decisions in terms of framework and technology, not only can you get back to the way that things were before, but you also have this incredible engine for ROI. And we want to get back to ad optimization. We want to get back to some form of retargeting. We want to also give ourselves the opportunity to measure every click in a way that we haven't been able to do before. So like measuring every click all the way down to financials, all the way down to people actually signing up for health plans, things like that. So really important to kind of bring all of this together, but then also knowing that within that compliance layer, we need to understand how we're managing PHI. We need to understand how we are gaining consent and protecting the kind of the rights of our constituents that are often governed by both state, local, and kind of federal laws. Understanding universal preference center and all the different ways that we're connecting with our members in all of the different ways that we do it and the different relationships that they may have to us, right? An employee could also be a member and things like that. So understanding one individual and all of the different relationships or hats they may wear when they engage with our company is also a really important part of how we communicate. And then just making sure that things are actionable, things are auditable, and we're being really safe on that point so that we can get to all the great things that we want to be doing, like tracking really deeply our acquisition and retention goals, building that plan optimization, full funnel attribution, engagement scoring and analytics and all that great stuff. But it's really got to start with compliance. The bottom line is really that the use of third-party trackers and pixels that will not sign a BA with you is a violation. So using Google Ads, Meta, Trade Desk, Pinterest, none of them are willing to sign that business associate agreement with you. So while their pixels and tags are collecting a swath of both personal information and engagement information, all of that together can constitute PHI, and they don't really have any marketer-friendly ways or tools to be able to limit or give you control over what you're sending. So That's where the FTC is very involved in this, from the health breach notification rule, where state and local laws, I know California and New York are kind of the gold standard in terms of how restrictive things can be, and people tend to leverage one of those coastal states to build out their own compliance layer to make sure that they're covering their bases. Even things like operating in the city of New York or the state of New York without having consent management as part of your offering is something that we have to deal with. And then the platforms themselves now, while the government has gone back and forth on will we regulate, won't we regulate, nothing has stopped the class action lawsuits and litigation. Nothing has stopped law firms from specializing in tracking down healthcare tracking technologies and building cases that way. But now, more than ever, and in the last 18 months or so, the platforms themselves, like Meta, are putting out challenges and boundaries saying we're going to take matters into our own hands and have our own point of view, and that's severely restricting our customers' ability to optimize and get access to conversion data and things like that. So this Meta piece was actually kind of a big change in where the compliance landscape has gone. And this was the first time we saw a platform themselves take matters in their own hands, and we expect that Google and X and Bing and all of these other ad platforms will eventually kind of take the same sort of steps to not only be part of the problem, but offer some semblance of a solution, which is really just to restrict you further. And so Meta, back in January of 25, so roughly 18 months ago, came out and said, if we designate you, our customer, as either a health or a wellness brand, we are going to severely restrict your access to conversion data and the way that you're leveraging our platform. We don't get to use all of the great tracking tools and data and analytics that our friends in, say, retail get to do, but they've got some very specific rules that you now have to follow in order to leverage their platform to its fullest. And in the solutions that we provide, luckily, we've already built our process, our methodology, the way we think and execute on these types of things in a way that was doing things the way that Meta told us to do them way before they ever came out with this pretty disruptive privacy policy. And so when any of our customers that we were talking to that were already leveraging our product and already doing things the HIPAA-compliant way were handed this big, scary new policy, we were thankfully just be able to say, no change for you. We're already doing it this way. It's already steeped in best practice. We don't have to do anything here while other people are scrambling to try to find a solution. So that puts us in an interesting situation. We are finding in our conversations that marketing teams are meeting their compliance teams for the first time and starting to build those relationships, where IT is getting involved, where all of a sudden we need to challenge and ask more of our third-party marketing agencies who are displaying digital ads for us and putting pixels and trackers on our websites and things like that. So we're understanding this really takes a village. A lot of us have been living this for a few years now, so I don't want to be too reductive in, hey, this is why it's bad and why you shouldn't do that. We've been living this for a long time, but we are really put in a place that I think we just want to recognize of having to manage either, where we want a minimal risk or maximum reach. So a lot of our customers, a lot of prospects we're talking to have either pulled all of their trackers off their website, they're flying blind on ROI, they're still spending the money, but they don't understand if they're spending it well. It's harder to justify. Our agency partners are also having a really hard time justifying and being able to optimize. But at the end of the day, the other option is to keep it all running and maximize your risk, which is also obviously not the place that we want to be. So the first thing that we want to do in looking at the blueprint is understand the difference in the way that we want to handle this data. There are a lot of people out here, a lot of organizations out here trying to solve this problem. A lot of them are either doing too little, or many of them are also doing too much from a compliance perspective. So being able to get access to how these pixels or tags are interacting with your website and tracking your visits and your click-throughs and conversions, a lot of people's inclination is to restrict everything all the way down to its bare bones to the point where you're barely getting any more information than you would if you just took that tag off altogether. So this is kind of my favorite slide just to illustrate how we want to handle the different types of platforms and handle the data so that we can still maximize the usage and the efficacy of those platforms while still staying protected. So when it comes to analytics platforms, all of our Google Analytics users out there, we need to be able to send off to Google any of our web performance information. We call that the health information. So what URLs are being accessed, how our landing pages are performing, what our session times are, what content's being engaged with. Is our website performing the way that we want it to be? But what we do not want to do as part of that issue of HIPAA and commingling health information with personal identifiers is we don't want to send out any of the identifiers. So IP address was the big data point that kind of put the country in a tizzy from a healthcare marketing perspective. But also things like city, state, and location, device ID information, any of those personal identifiers. So we need to be able to obfuscate or redact or hash any of the personal identifiers, but still give our analytics engine the web performance data so we can get as much information as possible to them to, again, help to optimize and understand performance. Analytics itself is pretty well understood at this point in terms of what the do's and don'ts are. There aren't a ton of gray areas when it comes to that. Ad platforms is where we see a lot of either misinformation, people taking things too far or not far enough. And that is really in the hands of what marketers really care about. And so if we're leveraging a platform like Meta, we want to make sure that we understand the individual. We understand the conversion. When somebody clicks on a great ad that we've placed, takes it to, say, a website to request a quote, we want to take that conversion, understand that individual. We want to know who that person is, but we cannot be sending out to Meta the contents of that ad. So we want to know that Jim clicked on an ad. We want to know that Saul clicked on an ad, but we do not want to release any of the health information about whatever wellness program we were running, the plan information that we were trying to sell, things like that. So we need to be able to split those identifiers from that health information so we can still understand the individual and the conversion, but Meta isn't understanding also anything about that person's health or their intentions around their health. So how do we do that? So this is a simple diagram to illustrate how we want to manage the data. You'll notice that on the far right side there, we've got Salesforce in the mix. This can really be any HIPAA-compliant data warehouse or customer data platform. In this instance, we're going to leverage Salesforce here because it is the best-in-class kind of Gartner top right quadrant customer data platform. And when leveraging a customer data platform, you're going to be able to do a lot of amazing things that Jim is going to talk about in just a minute here. But the way that we want to manage and protect this data while still being able to optimize and understand measurement and ROI is we've got our member-facing, our consumer-facing website. On our website, we're likely running Google's Tag Manager, where we've got all of our tags firing and collecting information when somebody hits our page from a natural search, from a paid search, from a great ad that we placed. We're getting conversions, we're getting visits, people are interacting with our content. Typically, that information goes straight out to those platforms, to Meta, to Google, to the Trade Desk, to our analytics platform, Adobe. But what we want to do is we actually set up our own kind of version of Google Tag Manager up on Google's cloud using just best-in-class marketer-friendly technologies. Again, we're talking Google Tag Managers, Google Cloud Platform, an enterprise data system like Salesforce. We all, within this kind of situation, would sign a BAA with you. So we can transmit, share, pass through any sensitive data that we need to as partners who agree to do that. As people are hitting your website, as those conversions are hitting, we basically just play traffic cop, right? We're redirecting all of that data to our server first, where we've got a redaction engine that applies all of those rules that we just talked about on the previous page. We've got line by line kind of data point access and control over what we do or don't send. So we understand which points need to be hashed or redacted or obfuscated. We understand which things you can't send at all. We also understand which data points are just required to send to Meta to make the platform run at all, that we have to kind of massage or anonymize just to send a value, but not necessarily the accurate value. So there's a lot of redaction and things that go on like that. This is really well templated. We understand how this stuff works. We understand what good looks like here, so we come to bear with our consulting and expertise. But then there's also some flexibility in the system to understand, hey, these are some gray areas. Let's talk to compliance or legal and see where you lie on that spectrum in terms of whether or not you want to include this in your kind of payload of data that goes out to third parties. So essentially, data comes to us first, we clean it, it leaves our BAA perimeter that we've kind of set up with just the clean data. But the benefits of leveraging a customer data platform like Salesforce is that we can actually land all of the raw data for you right within your customer data platform that we stand up for you. So we can send along IP addresses and device IDs and city, state, location, and that full unredacted data set goes right into a solution like Salesforce. Why is that important? Really, from the ROI and the measurement perspective, and what Jim is going to drill into is simply by being healthcare marketers and doing things the right way, we've created a whole new problem for ourselves just by being compliant. So we've got our great, now we're compliant, but when I now go into Meta or into Google Ads or into any of these platforms, our agency partners, our marketers themselves are accessing these platforms to understand how we're performing. That's where we're getting our reports and our analytics and things like that. But if we're only now sending a fraction of the data that we used to, we now have a far less reliable reporting tool. So when we have a Meta pixel that was running at one point collecting 25 different points of data, we may only now be sending them 5. And so we've created this new gap. But because we can land all of that data for you within your own systems, within your own 4 walls, within your BAA kind of perimeter where your PHI may live, we can now fill those gaps in data. We can now make that data whole. And because you've got a customer data platform, we can really start to use this not only as a compliance layer, but as a supercharged performance and measurement tool where we are adding in all of our other first and third party data sources to really do all the great dreams and things of a CDP. So we can start to pull in member data, start to pull in propensity data, start to pull in our CRM data, any other third party data, understand and create these unified profiles of our member and prospective members and really start to personalize and push things in a way that we really weren't able to do before. So not only is this compliance layer, but now it's also the supercharged engine that we're going to dig into next. Not have to talk about all this compliance stuff. So we spent the first part of the session talking about compliance and why it matters and how we need to use this as our foundation for tracking and for activation. But Jim, here's a question that we're often asked is, you're compliant, now what? So I'm going to pass it over to Jim here, and let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, no, and thanks, Saul, and you're spot on, right? And so as marketers, we hear this question because the compliance rules added a real hurdle, and it pulled us away from our actual growth goals, right? Which is, every marketers were definitely looked at to drive growth and retention and improve the member experience, right? And basically, and even more and more, improve the ROI, right? And so as we start thinking through this, right, this compliance piece, absolutely critical, but it really wasn't our goal, right? It was really just we had to step in and kind of solve this to get back to what we were trying to do, right? Does that make sense? So we're solving the compliance risk, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean we're solving attribution, right? So the fact of the matter is, and you can see on this slide here, is that we really have to get deeper into this idea of this click gap of what's happening and how do we get from the compliance piece to the ROI piece. And so we're going to spend some time here now over the next 10, 15 minutes and really kind of digging into that from not just the digital perspective, from a broader actual member data perspective, and really start to stitch together some of the things you were chatting about there, Saul, about this unified view.
That makes sense. So, and really what we're getting to here is compliance really is solving the risk, but we're not solving attribution.
Exactly. And that is really where the opportunity needs to live, right? And so here's what most marketers are looking at today, right? This top level where the updates and enhancements, right, in the new rulings is masking that PHI, specifically, right, your IP address, in this case, and it really prevents identification for conversion tracking, right? It really kind of puts your data falling into this black hole, right? And you're not able to really see it all the way through. The destination solution that you just walked everybody through, it safely manages your web tracking data in a very HIPAA-compliant manner, as you've already outlined, but it also takes it from de-identifying before passing it to ad platforms, but then it re-identifies and it really kind of closes that click gap, and it really associates that website user directly to the enrollment conversions, right? And it really allows those healthcare marketers across the various groups that are attending today and those we work with it gives them access to a unified view of that data, and which really just becomes, it starts to become now first party data. And that is a really big advantage point, because now you can take that data and you can start enabling it to drive better insights and retargeting, right? Which is, again, things that we've been used to for years as marketers, but have had to overcome this recent hurdle that's just been put into play the last couple of years. And so what does that look like, right? We can take an example very clear of kind of the difference between a unified data view versus a view without unified data, right? And if we were to look at the web data for the enrollment campaign data, this top example, right, it shows most marketers' current view, and it's really just those top of funnel metrics, where campaign 1 seems to be outperforming campaign 2. It's got higher impressions, right? The click-through rates are better, the click-through rate's better, but there's a black hole into, like, did it truly drive a conversion, right? So when you look at the bottom and you look at the larger view, we can clearly see that campaign 2 is actually doing a better job driving what truly matters, which is actual enrollments, right? And so having this unified view now helps us understand the full picture, which empowers us with, like, the right information, so we can start reporting properly to senior leadership, and we can start optimizing how we're spending that ad budget, right? Because just because impressions are high and clicks are high doesn't mean that it's truly converting in the right way, right? And we need that data. We need to really tie it all together and stitch it together. So I want to go now and just kind of pivot a little bit here. We spent a lot of time talking about compliance, and obviously very important. Compliance, clearly it's not optional, right? We've got to do it. But it really allows us to operate kind of safely, to leverage those third-party platforms, ensure that we maintain compliance with things like consent, and making sure that we're using some of the communication preferences that we capture for our prospects and our members to be able to create, like, personalized, sticky relationships, right? That's really the game here, right? If we're going to move from compliance on the left all the way to the ROI on the right, we now know that we can do that with the solution we just kind of outlined for ads and third parties. But what about all of the existing member data that you have today? How are you working to drive better growth, better retention, and really drive, full measurement across all of the data that you have, right? Not just the performance data. And that's really what we're showing you here. This is what we call precision marketing for member growth. And it is a unified program as a whole, right? It allows us to bring together the best of the both worlds, right? The performance marketing to drive net new growth, but also stitching together the unified view and the data for the unified members and prospects, so that way we can truly start segmenting people into very specific information types and starting to personalize messages to these people on a one-to-one level at scale, so that way we can create better experiences, and that drives them to taking actions quicker and sooner, and then we can stitch all of that back into our ROI to truly understand first touch attribution, last touch attribution, and how are we truly moving the needle, right, across this. And that is the key, is getting access to all of your first party data, so that way you can drive really true segmentation here.
So, Jim, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt for a second. Where do you see organizations then struggle the most?
Yeah, that's a good question, Saul. What I see is that, number one, it's struggling on a unified vision of kind of really what are all the levers to drive growth, right? To drive retention. And remember, we're being focused and measured as marketers on, like, the outcomes, right? And so the biggest pieces is that most people have one or two of these buckets kind of figured out, and they're not necessarily looking at this holistically. And that's really the gap right here, right? It's definitely more of a start with a vision, but then now we got to unify the data. And we do that properly, we're off to the races.
Okay, so it's not a technology problem.
No, usually not. No, most of the time, and it's not really a data problem either, if I'm being honest, right? This is really an orchestration problem. It's getting everybody on the same page to get the most out of your investments, not only from an ad spend side to top of funnel to drive net new, but it's also to align people to leverage all of the investments in the technology that you've made, so that way you can centralize that data and you can put it in the marketer's hands to activate it and then measure it, right? Like, that's really what's going on here. Yeah. So, and we'll talk about this program as we continue going throughout the rest of this. But if we were to kind of keep moving here, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing here, right, is looking at this funnel in general, right? Because to reiterate what I was just mentioning a minute ago, oftentimes I see you've got performance marketers who are solely, focused on driving growth, like net new growth, oftentimes through ad platforms. And then you have teams that are responsible for driving like member and retention and member re-enrollments, right, and renewals. Right, a lot of times they're on separate teams. And what we want to make sure is that we're looking at the funnel holistically, right? We should have a funnel where we're driving and measuring everything at the top, but also following these different kind of versions of people, these prospects and these existing members, driving them to the bottom of the funnel, right? And making sure that we're measuring every click of the way. Understanding that if they're a net new person that came in from an ad, great. What ad drove them? What vendor that we were working with actually gets, attribution for driving this conversion? What creative is actually moving them through this, right? What's their conversion point, right? As we continue moving further down, we just need to validate, like, did it come from a broker, for example, right? Like one thing we haven't even talked about yet, Saul, is where do the brokers come into play, right, in this situation? And how does that kind of tie into what we're doing here, right?
Yeah, I think that they're influencing enrollment decisions all the time.
All the time. And so as a marketer, we need to be able to clearly understand how did a lead get into the funnel, from what source, and understanding how can we be better at creating this kind of engagement score approach to make all of the steps easy, less barriers to entry, so that way we can get the conversions that we're looking for, right? For whether it's new membership enrollments or renewals, and where's that coming from, right? Is it coming from a broker? Is it coming from our paid media? Is it coming from emails that maybe we're sending proactively out of our tools that we already have, right? There's all of this stuff needs to be tracked and measured against each other, but they all do land in the same kind of funnel here that we're looking at it. And so the signals that matter aren't just the top of the funnel, which is part of the disconnect I see in a lot of organizations. We need to have the full unified view so we can do what we just showed on that press screen, which is tie the top of funnel actions, right, and activities to the bottom of the funnel conversions, right? And those conversions done correctly is going to really drive loyalty and stickiness. Definitely. So I want to take a second here, and I like storytelling, and I want to introduce everybody here to Alex. We're gonna kind of pick on Alex a little bit between now and like the next few minutes or so. But in this situation, right, I want to kind of bring everything we're talking to, I want to bring it to life, make it something that's real and tangible, so that way people can kind of understand what we're talking through, right? And rather than looking at like funnels and attribution in theory, like let's look at what this actually looks like in a real member journey, right? And so this is Alex. He's 47 years old, recently lost his employer-sponsored coverage, right? And like many consumers, he begins his journey online, searching for health plan options during enrollment season, right? And the first thing to recognize is that in every interaction Alex has with the organization, it creates a signal, right? We're talking about all these signals. It really starts with awareness, right? On the left-hand side, as we know how this funnel works, Alex sees, let's say, a paid search ad or maybe a social advertisement promoting an available health plan options, right? And that impression, that click, the website visit, it all becomes measurable signals, and it helps us understand kind of how he discovered, the organization. But as he moves from left to right, and he moves into consideration, he begins exploring the plan information, right? He visits the website, maybe he compares options, he spends time researching benefits, and those actions, right, create additional signals that we got to stitch together, right, and help us understand what's working, what's not working. So when we reach an important milestone, right, there's things start to get real interesting for us, right? Like many consumers, like Alex, he doesn't immediately enroll. He does some research, he gets pulled away, maybe takes a couple days off, maybe a week or two, he goes silent, right? Maybe he went ahead and requested a quote but didn't act on it, right? And so we need to be able to understand that information and kind of, re-engage Alex again, so that way he can kind of keep moving, right? We got to nudge him, right? And so you can't do that without a connected data strategy. And that's part of what we're trying to validate here and help you guys understand, is that whether it's ad data upfront or whether it's existing member data, we've got to stitch it all together so that way we can keep the pulse on Alex and keep him moving and leverage that first party data that we're collecting to help make his experience feel one and a special one just for him, right? And so since we're capturing those signals, right, we can automatically trigger a personalized re-engagement journey for him. And maybe it starts highlighting some of those plan benefits that we talked about. Maybe it's a text message that we send out. That the channels really matter less than the fact that we're responding to Alex and we kind of know what he's already done. That's the key, right? We're meeting him where he's at based on the behaviors he's taken. But so eventually maybe he'll return and he completes the enrollment, he becomes a member. And here's the important point. Most organizations stop measuring at enrollment, right? And that's where we've got to be a little bit different. I got to challenge them is that because enrollment isn't the end of the journey. It really is just the beginning of the member relationship. And we have to create, using this data, a real handoff from being able to make that enrollment to then tying them to like a welcome journey or tying them to additional follow-ups that they might need to have for around education and other pieces, right? And that's really the power, right, of being able to have this full funnel attribution is that we're no longer measuring like isolated clicks or campaigns. We're measuring how every touch point can contribute to a business outcome while maintaining the compliance that we talked about earlier, right? And then personalize it. So that way Alex feels like, wow, that was easy. I felt like they heard me and they moved me forward. And wow, I'd do that again. In fact, maybe I've even recommended some friends to do it because it was that easy, right? And that's kind of really what we're trying to solve here. So on that note, Saul, in your experiences, based on your expertise, how many organizations can kind of actually see this entire journey today, right? The way we just talked about it.
Very few. I'd say they're either looking at the ad platform, they're looking at the CRM or the enrollment system, but never connect. And that's a lot of what we're doing with our customers right now.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And that's good, don't get me wrong, but we need to be a little bit stronger, right? We can't just be focused on kind of the last thing that caused enrollment, which we've got to be able to prove that, number one. But we've also then got to be able to take that data and then we got to stick with Alex, right? And we've got to continue with him on his journey, right? To help create, a loyal and sticky member, right? As he starts getting into the coverage plan. This is really just going to help kind of reiterate a little bit of that example, right? That we just walked through with Alex. Because this is really where the real challenge has been for most people, is that if we look across the top of the slide, Alex interacted with like multiple touch points before he even actually enrolled in the plan. He saw a banner ad, he visited the website, right? He called the organization, he may have had clicked on a meta, right, in that example, so another ad, and then he requested a quote, which eventually, right, he enrolled, right? And so it's really important to understand that between that meta ad click and that quote requested, that HIPAA-compliant tool is going to give us all of that data to string it all together so that way we can re-engage with him and send him that re-engagement journey, right? That's a big part of what happened there. And so now that we've kind of seen that most organizations can see pieces of this journey, but we really need to make sure people understand that with that unified data approach, you can now truly stitch together a best-in-class experience that's going to help tell the story, not just for Alex and make it easier, but also for the ROI, right? And understanding what was his journey and what worked and what didn't work. And that's how we start scaling those insights to get more people like Alex to take the right actions, right? I'm going to kind of reframe for a second, okay? So my hope is that anyone who's joined today has a clear understanding at this point of like, hey, how do we truly start being compliant? How do we track that data that's being collected from our third-party ad platforms in a HIPAA-compliant manner and stitch that back to an actual conversion, right, where they actually enrolled? And how do we start tracking all of the pieces in between, right? That right there is exactly what I'm hoping people have picked up by now. The other thing that I want to make sure we're leaning into is, remember, driving net new membership obviously is ideal, but we do not want to forget about how we can get the most out of our existing members. How can we get them to be able to be more adherent to getting the preventative care that they need? How can we make sure that they're feeling good about navigating our portals? How can we make sure that we're kind of keeping them on track, right, with doing the things? How are we making sure we're creating the great experience so that way they know exactly what to do and when to renew, right? Like all of these things matter. And so what I want to kind of just pull here is something, Saul, you were chatting about this earlier, is that when we are creating a centralized unified view of using the data that we've got, right, whether it's behavioral signals you can see on the left-hand side, all of the kind of website activity, any kind of form fills that they may have engaged with, right? Maybe they've taken some health risk assessments or any other digital kind of engagement. We want to bring that data into like a CDP where we can unify on all of that, right? And we can layer it against any of the other additional kind of member signals, things like their member demographics, what we know about them, any of the benefits that they have, claims that they've kind of already, collected along the way. And then we want to make sure that we're, understanding the data that drives adherence and utilization of their plans. And if they have any care gaps that are open, right? Because we want to close those. That's a big deal for us. And then the other thing too is that, and not every organization has this, but when we're thinking kind of best in class, there's other data that we want to layer on top of this, which is more kind of consumer data that's like propensity modeling data, like, hey, here are some audiences that can tap right into our members and our prospects, said, hey, these people are pretty likely to convert, right? And let's layer that on top of some of the segmentation that we've got. And so that really is the key, though, to what I'm showing here, is that all of that data in a unified view wrapped around this unified profile of the person really allows us to do what marketers really care about, which is very deep personalized segmentation with the content that matters at the time that it matters, and making sure that it's relevant and easy for them to actually take action, right? So we can measure it, right? Like, that's really what this is about. And so this slide here is really depicted on the value that, like, data by itself doesn't create value, right? Visibility by itself doesn't create value. The real value, it's really created when we transform that data into meaningful audiences and then activate those audiences at the right moment, right? And that's really the big key ingredient here, is that we can do that with the first party data collected from the web activity. But more importantly, and as equally important, we can get more out of our existing members by unifying this data and then creating more personalized experiences to get them to do things instead of this general spray and pray marketing, right? We talked about this kind of program for member growth, right? Precision marketing and growth. What we're looking for, and we're striving for everything on the right-hand side, the business outcomes here, right? At the end of the day, making sure that my ads are working and making sure that I'm driving metrics, all of that is relevant, so that way we can prove to our business leadership that we are acquiring members, right? We are building value and retaining members, that we are driving such a great experience that our quality scores go up, right? Things like our stars platforms, right? We're getting really good ratings. Overall member experience and engagement is high, and that drives the member value, right? Which again allows us to make sure that we're not churning constantly year over year, right? And so that's really what this is all about. It's like, how do we make sure that we're staying compliant and have the tools and the capabilities to move from left to right through that larger unified view of the person, and then be able to segment on that data that we've got by bringing it over and then activating it to the channel where we've got data that, hey, this member or this prospect is likely going to take most action if we just send them an email, or we might need to resurface them with an ad, right? Like, we have the metrics to tie all this together, right? My hope is that this slide really seams it all together, because at the end of the day, the real story, we started with compliance, and we talked about the whole visibility, the attribution, segmentation, the activation piece of this. But the bigger point really here is the member experience, and it cannot be managed as a series of like disconnected campaigns, right? We've got to look at this holistically, because Alex doesn't look at us as a system of data points, right? Alex is like, hey, I'm a real person going through this stuff. Make it easy for me, right? Make it make sense for me. Make me want to come back and do more with you. And so the fact of the matter is that, right, like historically many organizations have focused only on a handful of touch points. The best in class groups, maybe they focus on acquisition campaigns, right? Focus enrollment. They focus on contact center, tying, stitching together that whole member experience 360. And maybe they focus on a little bit of the care management, quality outreach, right? All of these moments matter. And that's the key. We've got to be good at all of these things if we're really going to be, what we strive for, which is kind of best in class, right? And we just have to keep it at the forefront that members don't experience our organization in silos. And therefore, we've got to create this very seamless front-end user experience. And we'll do that through unified data.
So we do, just as a reminder, we've got a chat function. You can put some questions in there that we're happy to answer. Let me look through and cherry pick one or two. Okay, how about this one? So our performance marketing team and our member experience and CRM teams are siloed. Where do health plans typically start when trying to connect acquisition campaigns and retention and HEDIS performance and all that stuff?
Yeah, well, so we kind of touched on this earlier, but I know we said a lot here. Number one, it's really about starting on the vision, right? Like, I definitely have seen it, and it happens a lot, that even within marketing, there's silos, right? And so the first thing is that maybe we've got a leader at the top that is already kind of like saying, hey, this is one connected thing, right? Performance marketing, tied to like, member retention and outreach. And we'll even throw in brand, because brand is all part of this too, right? We need to make sure that those three units are really having conversations that complement each other, and that they understand where one piece is kind of like starts and ends, and where it hands off to the next, right? So it's really about this vision of understanding like, hey, we should be looking at this holistically. We should be looking at this as unifying the data so we can not just prove ROI, but improve those experiences in between. And that's really where I would start, right? Start by having a vision conversation, being able to bridge that gap and make sure we're all moving in the right direction. The second part to kind of tap that together is like, okay, let's now roll up our sleeves and let's actually like have a deeper dive session on saying like, okay, I do things this way in performance marketing and I have this data. Each team kind of would go through and say what they're doing. And then this is where the, like a CDP now starts to stitch all that together, right? So that's part of what happens. To get the same vision, that we're all moving in the same direction, we're all aimed on the same end goals. And how do we work together to complement each other and leverage a CDP to get all that data centralized and create that unified view, right? That's really like where you would go from like right now to next steps.
Got it. Cool. I'm going to take this other one. This was asked, I think, pretty early, so hopefully we covered a good chunk of it. But what does this mean for the tools we're already running on member portals and plan websites, things like Meta and GA4? Are payers being held to the same standard as providers, or is the risk exposure different for us? And so this is a conversation that we have a ton. Hopefully we've answered a good chunk of that by saying this is absolutely something to worry about. The risk is the same. But I also want to call out, just because some specific pixels were called out, is that there's so much more to it too that are blind spots and gotchas that kind of seem ridiculous at times. But it really is an education on how these platforms really work and are efficient. So good examples are, should you be using Meta or GA4? Not without a solution in place to be able to manage that data like we just talked about, so that you can do it safely. But also there are a ton of gotchas that we didn't even get to touch on. Leveraging a find a provider that has maybe an interactive Google map associated with it on a payer page. Also a violation. No matter what you do, leveraging interactive Google Maps is kind of collecting and laying down that same cookie that we want to avoid on the analytics side. Google's just collecting that data. Even having YouTube videos on your website collect a ton of data. A lot of customers are either moving to Vimeo, which is a platform that will sign a VAA, or another HIPAA-compliant video service, because YouTube is collecting all of that data and doing it in the same way that a tag would on your website. So there's a lot of other gotchas out there and things that we work with our customers on to make sure they understand the full scope. The big ones are ad campaigns, because that's where the big money is, but there are so many other gotchas in there too that we've got experience with over the last 3 or 4 years of solving this problem, that your risk is the same, and there are also some hidden risks. If you solve for Meta and you solve for Google, there are still other things out there that we want to watch out for, like our videos and maps. We'll take one more question. And Jim, I'm going to give this to you because I think you've probably been in this seat before. How do you prove to a CFO that marketing drove premium revenue and member retention, not just click volume or cost per lead? And I think more importantly, since you did kind of illustrate some of that, what's a realistic timeline to demonstrate this kind of ROI? Because we're talking pretty big stuff, it seems like.
Yeah, well, so again, great question for sure, because this is someone who's understanding the bigger picture here, which is we need to make sure that everything that we're doing on a day-to-day basis is actually getting the nurturing and the embracement of the senior leadership, right? And so this is everything. And this is why we almost have to start here, right? To say like, hey, how are we measuring ROI? And this is where I would encourage, right? I would encourage conversations between the marketing team and, the CFO, or whoever is, maybe that person that's overseeing this from the financial side, is let's first align on how are we measuring things today? What are we aligned on? What is a conversion? What's not a conversion? And how are we truly understanding how we define ROI, right? And that to me sounds so simple, but I can tell you I've been in so many conversations where the same term means something different to somebody else. The word conversion is a really good example. Depends who you ask. It's going to mean something different, right? So it's really about, number one, let's align with our CFO. And let's really have a clear plan of kind of what we're doing and how we're doing it to make sure that hey, we're going to count this, right? We're going to count this attribution in this way. And what we outlined in this call is, I can tell you right now, I have not met a CFO yet that says, no, I don't believe in this, right? When you have the data that can stitch together that, hey, this person was in one of our campaigns, they engaged in a campaign tactic that we can prove, there's a click of some sort, that led then to a direct enrollment within a certain period of time, right? An attribution window, we call that. And that enrollment then got counted into our system, right? Those are the things that we can establish that from A to Z and have a clear lineage that says, hey, we drove this. As marketing, we're not just spending money to get clicks and impressions. We're actually driving enrollment, and we're driving care gap renewals and reminders, right? So we have that data on the back end. We have to stitch that together. So that right there is probably, high level the way you need to do it. How long does it take was your other part of that question, right? Like, how long does it take to kind of get something like this in place? This is where it's not one answer. And I say that because I've worked with so many organizations over the years that everyone is in a different maturity level. And it really first starts to kind of do an assessment to say, hey, where's your organization at today, right? Are you starting from zero? Most people aren't, right? Most people have some sort of attribution model in place today. They're probably doing a lot of things manually, but missing a lot of pieces along the way. And so what I would say is it really is going to be relevant. But if I were to pick out a couple examples, if someone's net new, sometimes it's a little quicker, if I'm being honest, right? Once we've established how we're going to do it and that everybody is aligned within the leadership team, and then we go build it, we've seen attribution stood up within 3 to 6 months, right? To where they're truly able to prove what's happening in a way that everyone is confident with. And the value of that is that, boy, it starts driving more budgets and starts driving more opportunity because, like, hey, we can prove it's working. And so now we want to do more. And there's now buy-in at the leadership level to say, all right, we agree. Let's go. Let's keep moving quickly. If it's an organization that, maybe on the opposite side, right? They've been doing this for a little while. They've got some pretty good things in place. Maybe they've already got a good relationship with the CFO. Sometimes it's just a matter of, like, taking this kind of disconnected gap, right, that we kind of talked about early on, and just reiterating what this true full funnel looks like and how are we capturing all of that engagement along the way. And so it's probably just kind of reiterating with that and then standing up some of those, some of the technology to get it done. I think we could do that. We often do that for clients in, sometimes it's 12 to 16 weeks, sometimes sooner, sometimes more, right, depending on kind of the situation. But that's a really good kind of example there.
Awesome. Well, no good marketers would let this opportunity go without a call to action. So number one, you have the opportunity to sign up for a quick conversation with us. We want to talk and we also want to listen and understand where you're at in your journey and where we can help. It could start with something as simple as ask us for a free web scan. We've got a tool where we can scan your website. We can call out those gotchas, call out any pixels that may be running. Sometimes the hygiene of what our marketing agency partners leave behind when they're done with campaigns, there's still some things buried there that we want to get rid of. So we can do that totally free. Also just have a conversation with you about what it looks like to just have a roadmap, where you guys are at. Maybe you are solving for compliance, but you're not doing anything to supercharge and take advantage of all the data that you do have. And we want to skip the compliance piece and we want to get right to measuring ROI and doing the stuff that marketers want to do. So we can help you close those gaps, just talk about attribution, have those conversations. We will be reaching out, but please also feel free to reach out to us, take advantage of all these conversations that we want to have.